Okay, and in part two here, I want to carry on with the all-weather. The one thing I didn't pick up on it on the previous interview, you said that the speed figures you were using in the 1990s wouldn't work on all-weather racing. So why was that?
Well, because the surface has changed, and therefore the tactics of the adopted by the jockeys changed. Speed figures work best when there's a predictable pace in the race. Yeah? I mean, obviously, speed figures don't work as well on turf because you cannot be confident that a horse who's produced a high speed figure in a race that was run at a decent pace is going to get the same decent pace in its next race. Follow?
Yeah. Could you not be sure that, is that why you like the quality racing? Because they're more likely to go a full clip.
They're more likely to go a reasonable speed, yeah. I mean, obviously, that was when I was using speed figures on turf back in the mid-90s. Almost all of that was in sprint races, where you can expect a decent pace. But if you watch, I mean, speed figures come from America, and they work in America because every race is run flat out from the stalls. And if you watch American racing, I mean, the famous Derek Thompson phrase, "They're not hanging about here." Well, he could use it 9 times at every meeting, couldn't he? Because they don't hang about. They all want to be up with the pace, basically, and therefore speed figures work. And when we had Wolverhampton operating on fibre sand and Lingfield working on Equitrack, was it called?
Yeah.
Front running was what worked, and it took the jockeys probably a couple of years, I think, to get used to that idea that tearing off in front, they were actually going to be able to stay in front, unlike what happens on turf, where you tear off in front and finish up last. And I mean, I could show you films of races.
But why is that though, Alan? Why is that?
The nature of the surface, basically.
But if the jockey's got a good clock in his head, wouldn't he be able to?
No, I don't know. The surface, once you got behind on that Equitrack surface, it was almost impossible to make up ground. I mean, if you watch Lingfield now, horses come from 4 or 5 lengths off the pace on the final bend, don't they, and storm home in the last 50 yards. You never saw that in the early 90s, up to the point where they changed the surface. Jockeys would be riding like fury at halfway in a mile race in order to try and establish a clear lead. And once they got that clear lead, nobody could catch them. And I was told by jockeys, and I thought myself it was because the surface was loose. It was like the sand on the beach where the tide never gets to, dry, and therefore horses trying to accelerate from behind were just slipping and sliding on the surface. So you had to be out in front to win the races. And again, that's why the speed figures worked. I mean, I had a golden 2 years, I suppose, 97, 98 probably, where speed figures at Lingfield and Wolverhampton were producing winners. And then more people cottoned on, and then they changed the surface, and that was the end of that, basically.
So the speed figure is something that you still take into account for your bets now?
No, not really. No. I'm interested if someone's done a fast time. I'll try and investigate why I think that was, and whether it's really a fast time or just a good time on a day when conditions were very fast. I do look at sectional times. If you can find a horse that's done fast sectional times. My trainer Michael has a filly called Under the Twilight, who's now won 4 handicaps since he took her over, and the last time she won was at Windsor, and she did 2 very fast furlongs, from 3 furlongs out to 1 furlong out. That was what controlled the race. Last time she ran was at Newbury, again over 6 furlongs, and they broke the course record that day, and the front runner won. And she'd given the front runner nearly a second start in the first furlong. Hopeless. She got no chance of catching up. She did incredibly well to finish 5th. She runs again at Newbury on Thursday.
Oh well, we'll have to look in the form book and see what's
So
happened.
she's second up to 7 furlongs this time, which she won over here last year. So.
Okay, now you sent me a list of bets that you've won more than £6,000 on. Now we have touched on why but they're nearly all at the top tracks.
Yes.
So you've mentioned already, why, because it's quality, etc. Is that literally the reason?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I did once win. I think one of those bets was here, and I still look back and think, how on earth was that possible? I backed a horse in a sprint handicap here, and it would have been, I think, year 2000. So we were sort of in that period where the pitch reforms were beginning to produce changes in the betting rings, new faces. And I backed this horse to win almost 7,000. I was on it. I bet at 12 to 1, I bet at 11 to 1, I bet at 10 to 1. But I didn't, the SP was still 10 to 1. I think it was about, it was 6-9, something like that was the win. The horse was called Dancing Mystery, trained by Eric Wheeler. And it was a draw-based bet, Simon. It was drawn up against the far rail. I think we might see the same this afternoon, hopefully, with no false rail in position. And you think if you look round no offence to the people who are standing in the ring, but I think if you turned them all upside down and tipped their odds out, you wouldn't find £7,000, would you?
Oh, that's a bit unkind, Alan. There's a few there that have got a few quid left.
But I didn't go anywhere near the rails with that bet. That was all done inside the Tattersall's ring.
Yeah, but in those days, the new ones were going to show everybody how to do it.
Well, exactly.
And they probably wouldn't have known who you were because they weren't
exactly,
clued up.
yeah.
So,
but I mean, that was also something I did. If I was having a big bet on course, I would spread the money across multiple bookmakers, not try and have it all on with one book. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So back when we sat down and talked, you'd written to the handicapper pointing out how antiquated the system was. So is it antiquated still? And did you ever get a reply?
It's dreadful still. It's awful. It's the timing that's the worst thing. It's the fact that they only update the ratings once every week. So I mean, you run in a race on a Sunday or a Monday, you don't get to know your new handicap rating until the following Tuesday, and it doesn't take effect until the following Saturday, which is, if you've won a race and you can run under a penalty is great, but if you've lost, you've been beaten and you're expecting yours to go down, you're compelled to wait 2 weeks before you can run again with the revised mark. That's ridiculous. And I mean, we're in the 21st century. We should be talking about sending text messages or emails to trainers to tell them what the new handicap mark is, not tying it to the publication of the racing calendar, which is what it is, Now
you said back then that horses with a penalty, they look like good things, they are good things, and they win uncompetitive races. Once again, I didn't ask you, but would you have filled your boots even if they're odds on?
No, I didn't. I tended not to get involved in that. It tended to be at the lower level, didn't it? Somebody would win a 0 to 100 round Fontwell off 85 and would turn out the next week off 92 with a £7 penalty, even though we all knew their handicap mark was going to be over 100. I think when I got involved with this as an owner, I started to see it as defrauding the other owners in the race. You've entered a race that's supposed to be a handicap, and yet you've got one of your rivals who's running off a lenient mark because they can't get a system that updates the marks fast enough.
And you didn't get a reply for your suggestions?
Well, to be fair, that was the origin of that was a questionnaire which covered an awful lot of areas, and it was given to me by Lydia Hislop, who was on the committee that was leading this, and it was my choice to write that paper about the handicapping rather than just answer their questions. And I did get some feedback from Lydia, but nothing's changed. It's still a weekly update. They got better at doing the actual job. I mean, handicaps now are very difficult. I very rarely bet in a handicap because they're so tight and close, and they do get the marks right most of the time, but it's still painfully. It took them a long time to sort out the business of French horses coming over here, jumps horses, with lenient handicap marks. I don't quite know what happened, although I suspect Phil Smith went and had a visit with whoever his French equivalent is and told him he was sick and tired of being made to look a fool. And the French have since upped all their ratings. They now have a handicap system that's even worse than ours, except that they update in 2 days. And there's no weekly update. And you get your new mark in the next race almost automatically.
And another thing you were doing back in the day was giving your advice to owners and trainers about horses for sale. Do you still do that?
Again, the French market is dead, basically. That was mostly about French racing, because I was following it fairly closely, and there were a few people who knew that I would, if they asked me about a horse they were being offered from France or a horse that was in an auction from France, they knew I would have a strong opinion one way or the other on what the horse was worth and what it might be able to do over here. when that handicap system in France was changed, which I think was about 5 or 6 years ago now, and it took a while, but by 4 years ago it was obvious that if you bought a horse from France that already had a handicap mark, and the UK handicapper simply converted that mark to a UK number, as they'd always done by multiplying the kilograms figure by 2.2, you had no chance of winning a handicap in this country with that horse. That was the first reason. The second reason was that the French trainers who were preparing horses, one run and let's sell sort of thing, were asking ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous prices. I mean, I can remember getting an email from a secretary in a major jumping stable. Could I have a look at this horse? And I looked at it, and the form was okay, but it was nothing special. And I went back to him and said, look, I think you might have to be patient. I think this might be a long-term thing. You might be a chaser rather than a handicap hurdler or a novice hurdler. You bring him over, he's going to have to carry a penalty for that win in all the novice hurdles over here. And I said, I think you'll probably get a bad mark. I wouldn't pay more than 50,000 for him, I said, based on the sort of prices I see at the sales. Well, they wanted 300,000. I mean, it's laughable, absolutely laughable. But they'll find somebody. They will find somebody who's daft enough to pay those prices. I don't know whether you'd want to have this on film, but about 2 years ago there was a sale held at a place called Yorton Farm Stud, run by Goffs, the auctioneers. That's one of these sort of boutique sales for point-to-point winners. And the owner of the stud...
Just don't mention any names, Alan.
Yeah, I'm not mentioning any names. The owner of the stud had a horse that he'd run in France 3 days before the sale, and it had won a maiden hurdle in France, somewhere down south, Cannes-sur-Mer or somewhere like that. Pau, I can't remember exactly which course it was. And I got 2 calls from different people, 2 requests from different people for a report on this horse. And each of them told me that their tame bloodstock agent was talking up this horse, saying that there was a 100k reserve on it and that they knew it would go above the 100k and probably the best prospect in the sale. Well, I had a look at the race and I thought, I don't know what they're getting excited about. The runner-up made a horrendous mistake early on in the race, which almost put him out. I didn't think and the third and fourth were horses that have been running in claiming races in France without anybody being the slightest bit interested in claiming them. So my report back was, well, it's won something pretty much the equivalent of a Hexham maiden hurdle, I wouldn't pay 100 grand, let alone more than 100 grand. Well, somebody paid 200 grand for it, and it was put into training. The first time it appeared was in a novice hurdle at Market Raisin. It drifted like the proverbial barge in the betting. And it was an odd sort of race because it was a midweek first race on the card, novice hurdle at Market Raisin, and it traded over 200 grand on Betfair before 2 hours before the race. Anyway, the horse tailed off last, and only reappeared about 6 or 8 months later in a Taunton 3-mile handicap hurdle, and didn't do anything in that either, and that was the last we saw of it. 200 grand.
Got a good thank you from your clients for that then.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to achieve. I was popular because I wasn't charging a fee, Simon. I was doing this for love. I mean, I just pleasure, it's enjoyment, If you can steer people correctly, that's great as well,